And this is just similar to where we were last week. Just a reminder, meaning of life is your relationship with God. When everything is considered, it's about relationship with God, that everything else falls to the side. Better way to put that actually comes from Psalm 23 and this right paths for his namesake. What's a right path? What's a wrong path? Every example that we show, that we started with last week with the industry, the things that we put our hands to, today we're going to talk about wisdom. The purpose of Solomon's discovery in Ecclesiastes is, I tried all of these different areas to find fulfillment, to find purpose, to find myself, to find my identity, and I couldn't find it anywhere. The only place I found it is in relationship with God. Amen. So, God first, and then the addition of something to put your hands to. The addition of an understanding of when to move and when not to move. How to minister to a broken world. I borrowed from Jasmine's message from last week, returned to Romans 12, for do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which we've spoken about multiple times now. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. We only find that in relationship with God. It becomes clear of when we are to speak, when we're not to speak, when we are to move and not to move, if we are abiding in God. Amen? What did Solomon discover in his time in pursuing wisdom? The same thing that you and I have discovered. Notice I chose this old woman to put in representation of wisdom. We often believe that it's the folks that have got some gray in their beards or their hair or both, like myself, that there's some wisdom. We touched on that last week, that it's not wisdom that necessarily is from making righteous choices my entire life. It's often because I traveled a bunch of different paths that were dead ends, and God brought me back to center and taught me lessons through those poor decisions. By God's grace, I got to an age where I am now gray, but that comes with a lot of bruises along the way. But prayerfully, by this point in our lives, we are now discovering that the world's wisdom is for naught. Amen. And so, as I mentioned before, the right path is that we learn that there is no wisdom outside of God's wisdom. We spend an awful lot of time worrying about the things of the world and engaged in politics and engaged in news headlines, and if I could just put my hands to it. But at this point in our lives, we've come to recognize the only one we can trust in, the only one that we can put our faith in, has nothing to do with the powers of Washington, D.C. It has everything to do with, the only way this all still runs is by God's grace. This isn't any one political party's, they can't claim success and that they've run this country better than the other party, because it's a mess. And it's a wonder that any of it works. And when we discover that out of a long life with interacting with the world, it truly becomes, I'm going to have to trust God in this, because it's not going to get done without God's influence. Ecclesiastes 1:13, I applied my mind to study and explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun, all of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. There's a blessing, there's a return to God from recognizing our limitations. When we're young, We don't believe we have limitations, that we can do everything. Solomon was reset by, I've put my mind to all of these things, and it only illustrated how much I don't know. It's a glorious day when you arrive at the place of reaching your capacity and recognizing God's capacity is so much greater. It's an on-ramp into relationship with God. When you believe you can fix everything, you are hindered. When you surrender your own wisdom and you recognize God is so much greater than your wisdom, now we find our way home. Amen? So Solomon expresses it's meaningless. It's not meaning, the world is meaningless. It means pursuing anything but God is meaningless. All of the interactions we have with one another are not meaningless. All of the pursuit of anything but God, that's where we tend to waste too much of our time. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it. That's it. Okay? That's how we defeat arrogance. That's how we defeat the where we place ourselves above others. That's how we become humble servants. Is God is great, and I am just a humble servant. And that's what returns us into right relationship with Him. Amen? So I hope we're starting to understand how to read Ecclesiastes of the different things that capture our imagination, capture our time, capture our attention, and how God creates these paths that lead us back to Him. It would be a terrible thing not to hit a dead end. It would be a terrible thing not to ever recognize God's greatness. And those are the ones to pray for. Each of us represented in the room have been humbled numerous times. And that's where our gray hairs and the lines in our face and the calluses on our hands have come from. And that's a good thing. That represents God's grace.